Hello, I'm Nathan Bynum, and I welcome you to my conversation about sustainability with my friend Martin Ogle. Martin's the former chief naturalist at Potomac Overlook Nature Center and Regional Park, and he's now the founder of Entrepreneurial Earth LLC, which provides education and consulting to encourage sustainable ways of being. He and his family live in Louisville, Colorado. Well, welcome back to Arlington, Martin. How does it feel to be back?
Oh, it feels great. We come about once a year to visit, and I'm glad I'm here.
Wonderful. So our conversation is going to focus on sustainability, and there's been a lot of talk about that lately. But we're going to focus on it from a perspective of how do we be sustainable with an understanding of life systems as we think about sustainability.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think that for me anyway, that's the key, is that we have to understand the system of which we're a part.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense, because if you don't understand the system, you can't really work with it very well in a sustainable way.
Exactly.
So what progress do you think has been made towards sustainability over the last, since the environmental movement really started?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's certainly a lot of progress. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we have so many tools that are at our service now, whether that be technologies like efficiency and solar energy and other energy systems. We have whole new ways of building that, say, result in a much more efficient building, one that uses a lot less energy and less toxic materials. We also have a lot of systems in place where people are thinking differently about their relationship to nature. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal.
Well, that's great. So in terms of so we have more efficient cars. I mean, I know I drive a hybrid car, which of course makes me feel good and hopefully contributes less to emissions and things like that. And I also have friends in architecture, and you're right, they definitely are using much more sustainable recycled means of building. I know Wakefield High School was just rebuilt, and they recycled, I think their goal was to recycle like 90% of the building. We just did a piece about that at AIM, and they even have geothermal heating of the water with wells that go 500 feet down into the earth and use the earth to cool and heat the water rather than just using electricity or using energy to do that. So yeah, we are making a lot of progress in that area, which is great. I'm curious to hear from you also about, how our understanding of sustainability has changed and ideas that have excited you in that area.
Well, it's interesting, the term sustainability probably came out in the 80s and became quite popular in the 90s. And then now you see it everywhere. It's almost overused. And I saw a rather funny cartoon one time where they plotted the use of the word sustainability, and it eventually came to the point where essentially every word that came out of someone's mouth was sustainability. And in some ways, because of this kind of thing, it's lost a little bit of its power, if not meaning, because we maybe overuse it and use it in ways that we're not quite sure if we're referring to the same thing.
Sure.
So it's a good thing that everyone's talking about sustainability, but now we have to maybe refocus our attention and figure out what that sustainability is. And in many of the small measures of sustainability, again, going back to things like efficiency and, say, the cost of solar energy and other measures like that, we're doing really well. I mean, you drive a hybrid, and lots of other cars are much more efficient than they used to be, et cetera. But what's the end result of that is what I'm kind of really most interested in.
Sure. And in terms of also understanding it, I've heard you talk about the Gaia theory. Do you feel like that has a part in thinking about sustainability? Is that helpful? And would you be interested in introducing the Gaia theory a little bit and kind of sharing what that's all about?
Well, sure. And when I was here in Arlington, I used the idea of Gaia theory to connote that we need to understand the living system of which we're a part, and then use the lessons and ideas from that to help guide our use of our tools and development of future tools, and even more important, guide how we start to think about ourselves in the world. And that's why I was a proponent of keeping the term Gaia. See, Gaia theory is basically Earth system science. But the metaphor Gaia comes from the Greek goddess of Earth. It was actually William Golding, who wrote The Lord of the Flies, who suggested to the scientist that he use that metaphor because it showed that Western science was rediscovering what our ancestors, our Western ancestors, had always known, that we're part of a living Earth, Mother Earth, if you will. And to me, that combination of both the power of the scientific explanation of life systems, Earth systems, with the metaphor that we're a part of it, was the most compelling idea. So as we started off saying that we'll look at sustainability through systems and life systems and how we relate to those, that to me has been a very compelling metaphor, but I've also used others to accomplish the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So it's like looking at Earth as a living organism in and of itself, not just a place for lots of totally separate living organisms.
Yeah, and the word organism sometimes trips people up because we don't have to say that it's an actual organism, because we think of organisms as dogs or people or bacteria, and so is the Earth really an organism? But it's truly a living system that's vastly different than what I was taught in high school and college, and I dare say probably most people still are taught in high school and college. You juxtapose the idea with a place with living things running around. And in fact, that's more the popular understanding of Earth, that we're a rock that's just perched exactly the right distance from the sun so that we'll neither burn up nor freeze.
Right.
That may have been the case way back when life first started evolving and coming to be on this planet, but over that time period, our sun has continued to heat up. And any astronomer will tell you that. It's a star, it heats up predictably. So that by now, we should have been way too hot to be existing on Earth.
Wow.
And so something is going on as a system, as a living system, that's helped kind of moderate and keep temperatures much cooler than they otherwise would have been.
Huh. Wow, that's amazing. And what, in terms of that, like, what types of can you give an example of a way that Earth is being kept cooler by the living systems on the planet?
Sure. Well, there's lots of different ways. Just like if you or I went out on a hot day, our body would be reacting as a whole to try to counteract, say, 100 degrees in Washington in high humidity. We might seek shade, we might sweat, we might try to shed our clothes,
Sure.
might do any number of things. And the Earth, unconsciously, just as an automatic process, is doing much the same. So that we have different amounts of cloud cover that reflect or allow light in. We have different amounts of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, vastly different over long periods of time, such that the original faint light of the sun could keep our planet quite warm because we had a bigger carbon dioxide blanket. And now we've gone down to a very, very tiny carbon dioxide blanket, which life has adjusted over time, if you will. But again, very automatically.
Wow. And in terms of the changes, what time period are we talking about in terms of, going from a lot of carbon dioxide to a little?
Yeah. Well, that's the key, and I think as we talk about global warming, there's a lot of misconceptions and misinformation out there. And we as human beings have been in a milieu in which carbon dioxide has always been very, very low levels. And so the environment that we came into and are adapted to is one where the carbon dioxide blanket is very, very thin.
This is like over 10 million years is it 10 million years that humans have been kind of around?
Well, there's a great human evolution displayed down at the Smithsonian, and basically as true Homo sapiens, we've only been around for 200,000 years out of Africa, but other human-like humanoids have been around a lot longer than that. But even all of them have been in a place of Earth's history where carbon dioxide is very, very slight and tiny. And now in industrial processes, we're adding to that amount and creating a situation where the blanket is getting thicker in relative terms. But the carbon dioxide blanket used to be much, much thicker, say 100 million years ago or 200 million years ago or a billion years ago. And that's what's changed over time.
Right. So as life took form on Earth and in probably a higher carbon situation, but also a cooler sun, life processes kept the Earth at livable conditions. And in a way, the Earth as a whole, without consciously working towards it, has worked towards maintaining a cool climate for us.
Yeah, much cooler than it would otherwise be. And I think it's that system lesson that's the biggest one. In other words, so what does all this esoteric talk have to do with sustainability? Well, the first lesson that comes out is simply that we're a seamless continuum of that life, and to first and foremost see that and respect it, I think, would be our first charge. And therefore, we would understand and respect the fact that we can change that system, and we can do it both unconsciously, as we probably do a whole lot, and we can also change it consciously, as we might want to consider more and more as scientists tell us we're entering a dangerous period. But feeling like we're a part of a living system and having the science to back that up is the key lesson here.
Right. So we started off this conversation talking about all these advances that we've had in efficiency and in recycling and hybrid cars and building techniques that involve the earth in heating and cooling water and all that. All those advances, is that enough to work with the planet to keep us in a safe climate zone or not?
Well, I think it depends on our intent and our ability to see what's happening around us and to correct if necessary. And right now, it could be argued that our intent is not so much to be sustainable as much as to keep our systems going, our human systems going, as we've become accustomed to them. So one example would be the imperative of economic growth. There's a real strong inertia around the ideas of economic growth that have been around for some time, and that therefore we're compelled to grow and produce more and do more, even in the midst of trying to do that more and more efficiently. So it's kind of like a tug of war between those two going on. There's other ways in which we see that, what we're trying to do is going in the right direction, but we're being tugged in other directions also. But that might be the biggest one, is the imperative for economic growth in terms of material consumption.
Sure, yeah, I know that with such a big reliance on the stock market, your stock doesn't go up because you're doing the same amount of business you did last year. It goes up because people think you'll do more business the next year.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty big part of that imperative to grow, and I can see how that would be difficult if you have an economic system that forces you to grow, but we only have a limited amount of resources on the planet. Then that would be challenging.
Right. And I think that we have come to a sense of realizing that is the situation. In other words, for instance, there's a lot of talk these days about how our economic growth has been decoupled from energy consumption. And it's true to a certain extent. In other words, it's not as dependent on energy consumption because we've become more efficient.
Okay.
But it hasn't really become decoupled. In other words, we still measure our wealth and prosperity by how much we consume in real terms. In other words, we measure our success by housing starts and our car market and things like that, both of which are our main material and energy consumers. So in practical terms, we certainly haven't been decoupled, but that we're talking in those ways is a major step forward.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, we're about to take a break, but that's going to lead in nicely to the next part of the show, where we will talk about some of the barriers to becoming sustainable as quickly as we'd like to. And I really appreciate the conversation so far. So please stay with us and find out more about what we're doing, but also the challenges to making this a sustainable economy. Thank you for watching. Welcome back to my conversation with Martin Ogle, founder of Entrepreneurial Earth, LLC. We began our conversation talking about creating a sustainable world. So, Martin, we were talking earlier, and it seems like we've made a lot of progress in efficiency. Our cars are more efficient, our building practices are more efficient. We have lots of progress in that area, but it seems like maybe we don't have enough because the carbon levels are rising. There's still more pollution, even though we're more efficient. I'm curious. Like we talked also about how the Earth tends to cool itself over the last millions of years. It seems like it's almost like a living thing, a living system that cools itself. Why is it that the Earth can't cool itself enough to, combat what we're doing?
Keep everything fine?
Yeah, keep everything fine.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a misconception we want to clear up right away, that somehow since Earth acts like a living system, that everything will be good because no matter what we do, everything will stay relatively stable. Stable is only in the macro sense. In other words, if our temperature were to go up just a little bit, or even more importantly, if other factors that keep us alive and well were to change just a little bit, then we're no longer in the same planetary system that we inherited not too long ago. So we have to see it's not so much save the Earth or save the planet, it's more save the humans. We have to take some self-responsibility here for not just assuming that everything is going to work out okay.
I see. So the Earth might sustain itself, but it's not really concerned about us.
Well, I think that's a good way to put it, actually. Any paleontologist will tell you that 90-some, probably 99-point-something% of all species that have been on this planet are not here, and one of the big reasons for that is simply that as time goes by, the state of the Earth, not just the temperature, which does go up and down a little bit, but also the atmosphere and the other kinds of organisms that they share the world with are constantly changing, one might say in response to the long-term upward heat of the sun.
Wow.
So we're in a very narrow slice of time, and we need to act well within that narrow slice of time.
Wow. All right. So our progress towards sustainability is there. We have something going for us, but why aren't we progressing faster? Why aren't we progressing fast enough?
Yeah. And some would debate that, of course, but many wouldn't, that we're not progressing fast enough, that we're not really reaching sustainable systems. And for instance, the world, there's the State of the World report that comes out each year and describes kind of where we are in that realm. And in the 2013, the front cover said, "Is sustainability still possible?" In other words, a lot of people that consider this question are wondering if we're going to kind of win the race of making sure that we don't change conditions enough that it will drastically affect us. And so it is a fair question. What is limiting our progress?
Yeah, that's a pretty huge statement on a cover of a magazine. Is sustainability still possible?
Yeah, the cover of an annually produced volume. And so, interestingly, about a week or two ago, I was at a conference in Colorado where they brought together engineers and economists from both Europe and the United States to discuss this question of what barriers are there towards moving in sustainable directions. Why aren't we moving that way? And there were a variety of answers, and many of them were technical, et cetera. But I was actually asked to speak, as were others, more in the non-engineering realm. Mm-hmm. And my answer to this is that we don't have the right cultural narrative to fit the situation that we're in. So we discussed earlier about how the idea of economic growth is compelling us in a certain direction. That and other things are our underlying cultural narrative that kind of give us meaning and guidance in our human affairs. And so I suggested that we needed another cultural narrative to take us into new directions that we know we need to go.
So what my understanding is that right now the cultural narrative is we need to grow economically. And how would you change that? What would the new cultural narrative be?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, of course, not many people would say that. If you ask them, so what is your cultural narrative, or what drives you as a family or a culture or a nation? They probably wouldn't say that. It's more that that's underlying everything, and so in a kind of a subconscious way it guides us and compels us. There's other things like that. So for instance, our own sense of our relationship to nature as a whole. And until very recently, I'd say that our own culture thought ourselves as pretty separate from nature. Maybe many wouldn't go so far as to say we were just plopped down here on top of nature, but the way we thought and acted was essentially that. And I remember there was a USGS volume that was talking about engineering of river systems and flood prevention and everything, and it was titled "Nature to be Commanded." And I think
when did this come out?
This was in the 70s, so it's been a while. But I think that compelling force, if you will, still underlies a lot of what we do. That we're going to manage and control something that essentially is separate from us. But now, with all sorts of scientific and non-scientific input, we're understanding that no, we're a part of not only nature as a whole, but nature is a little different than what we used to think nature as being. So nature is this living system of Earth that reacts to the changing imperative, the changing brightness of the sun. When you have that different idea of that you're part of a different system than you thought, and you no longer think that the same things you've been doing can keep going on, then you have to start searching for and creating within a community and nations different ideas of what gives human life meaning and purpose.
Oh, wow. So, manage seemed like a pretty key word of previous ways of looking at nature. Is there a word that you would replace that with in thinking about humans and life on the planet and living with nature?
Well, we're still going to have to manage things. We're consciously creative creatures, and we do things on purpose and so forth. And so we're going to be doing things to our surroundings and doing things with and to planet Earth. So we're still going to have to manage, but maybe it won't be our most compelling reason we're here.
Okay.
And so I'd replace it at first with maybe two things. One would be just a sense of humbleness. So we draw back from where we've been racing forward towards, and we go, we're a part of something bigger, something much bigger and much more long-term than our own species, let alone our own life. And then the second would be the idea of gratitude and thanks. This has popped up in a number of places through my life that I found really interesting and compelling. So, for instance, Janine Benyus, who is the creator of biomimicry, and a lot of people know that term and have read the book, she explores emulating nature's genius. And so we come up with new ways of doing things and new products based on looking at how systems in nature work. But when asked one time about how would we biomimic our relationship to Earth and our own mind's perception of nature and Earth, she said something which I really found profound, and that is that she says a sense of gratitude and thanks is the way that we biomimic the self-restraint that is automatic in non-human nature. So in other words, in non-human nature, things are pretty much limited because you can only get your energy and your resources from close by, and You can only get your shelter from close by, and you can't travel very far. And even birds that migrate, say, have to rely on what's there wherever they are.
Sure.
Whereas human beings have been able to transcend a lot of those limitations by creating power plants and harnessing hugely concentrated power sources and going to the far ends of the earth for our resources, etc. So there seems to be almost no limit to our ability to change, acquire, and build, etc. So we need some kind of conscious self-restraining mechanism, and she suggests thanks and gratitude is at least the starting point for that.
That makes a lot of sense. It's thanks and gratitude's not foreign to most people. I mean, most people, we have Thanksgiving, and people traditionally give thanks at that time, and yet we are collecting from all over the world. We are transporting things. We are using a ton of fossil fuel, and going with the theme of obstacles. Like, how are these things going to change? I mean, how are we going to stop doing any of that? I want to have my food from all over the world, even. I had a mango just the other day, and that didn't come from anywhere around here.
And we should be thankful for that.
So how does that work together?
Well, maybe linking our kind of culturally inherited signals that we still celebrate, like Thanksgiving, with new realizations. So I don't think it's a matter of either continuing on as we have or going back to some Stone Age existence. It's not either. It's a matter of going in new directions. And Jared Diamond, actually, who wrote both the books Gun Germs and Steel and the book Collapse, put it in a way similar to this. He says that the success or failure of a society is often based on which values we choose, whether we keep certain values and discard others. And I think that's where we are, is that we certainly need to keep certain values. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we need to discard some and to evolve other sensibilities that come with our new understanding of the world.
Can you give an example of a value that we really need to discard?
Well, discard in terms of our discussion about growth, for instance. A lot of people will say, well, isn't growth healthy? And I mean, we grow and so forth. Well, we wouldn't want to discard the idea that things grow, but growth for growth's sake as a measure and imperative, I think we probably should discard that. And there's a lot of alternatives out there that people have been thinking about a lot. And even if it's not well developed yet and well understood, certainly it isn't, we shouldn't say, oh, we're going to therefore keep our current value of growth for growth's sake at all costs.
I see.
So if we can first say we need to move away from that value, then we can really start working hard on what directions we do need to go.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So we'll be talking more about ways to replace that growth for growth's sake. Especially in the next segment that we'll start talking about hopes for the future. I wonder, in terms of where is this change going to come from? Because I'm not seeing it politically very much. It seems to be very slow progress. Politically, where do you think that change is going to come from, and what do you think is going to be part of that?
Well, I don't know that I can predict it, but as far as where I think it should come from, it definitely has to come and should come from all levels. And how could you envision it coming from the top down, for instance? But you almost have to say it can and will happen. There's certainly been the Berlin Wall moments and the collapse of the Soviet Union moments and all sorts of others that give us the if it's possible it can be, or if it has happened it's possible moments. And this might be an even bigger one than one of those. But first of all would just be the awareness that yes, indeed, we're part of a system that is different than we thought. Second, feeling like that there are alternatives to the ways that we think and what motivates us. And then from that starting point, our creative genius can really come into play.
Got it. So is efficiency enough? Do we just get more efficient, or do we have to actually pull back?
Well, that's a really interesting question to me. I met a man about 25 years ago. His name is Yu, and he's now one of the foremost landscape architects in China. His company is called Turinscape, which Turin literally means human land. And if you look online, you can find amazing things that he's done. Well, the talk that he gave was essentially about efficiency. He said that in ancient China, the idea of where to site a community and how to keep it going was based on feng shui philosophy, based on the yin-yang symbol. And it was basically to honor the fact that we can go too far in one direction and we need to come back the other. Well, he said that there's been Chinese villages that have been on the face of this earth for thousands of years. And in the, I think, early 1900s was the time frame of this, Western efficiency experts came to China and started changing the design of those communities. And he says they straightened out all the roads that had previously been curved, straightened out the waterways, and then following that, all our communities started to fall apart, or many of our communities started to fall apart. Huh. And so it gives you a whole new sense of what efficiency is. What are we using efficiency in service of? If we use efficiency to be able to grow faster, and that's our major underlying reason for being, then that's all it will do. Eventually, it will result in more energy being used, not less. So that little story that I remember from Yu has really stayed in my mind over many years.
Right. Well, I can imagine, and I'm looking forward to talking more about how to change our use of efficiency so that we use efficiency to actually be more efficient rather than just to do more and more and have it grow like that. And we need to take a break, but we'll be back shortly and talk more about the hope for the future and different ways of looking at life systems on Earth and how they work with our economy.
That's what we need to do.
Thank you for watching, and we'll be back shortly. Stay tuned. Welcome back to my conversation with Martin Ogle, founder of Entrepreneurial Earth, LLC. So Martin, last time we were talking about how efficiency doesn't always mean better lifestyles, like that city in China, where the first time that Western people came in and made all the streets straight so that everybody could get everywhere much more efficiently, it actually made things worse in the city, based on what happened. So how is it that we can look at efficiency in a way that helps us? What do we do with it?
Yeah, I think the question is, what is efficiency serving? Is it serving economic growth, or is it serving or actually reducing our energy use? And as much as we become more energy efficient over the decades, we still use more energy. And I think an example that is kind of very real in people's lives these days is time. We find ourselves very hurried, do we not? And I always find it kind of ironic at the surface anyway that cultures like ours and China, or maybe China now, but Korea and Japan, have more time-saving equipment than anywhere else on Earth, but we're probably the fastest paced societies on the face of the earth.
Absolutely.
And so the seeming paradox is solved when we realize that time-saving equipment often wasn't even designed as, let alone used as, time-saving equipment. It was used as production increasing equipment. So that if some company gets the ability to do things faster than their competitors, well, then that just raises the bar on where the competition level is. So we have to go faster and faster and faster.
Right.
And I think that's all tied into our paths going forward towards sustainability, is we have to see that reality too. And
it reminds me of
with it.
How email was supposed to be a time-saving thing, but now email takes out a huge chunk of my day every day.
Yeah. So we maybe communicate more efficiently per message, but the number of messages and the number of things we can do electronically these days is so overwhelmingly more vast than what we used to do that it takes more time.
Yeah. And with resources, it's kind of the same way. We can be more efficient with our resources, but if we are always trying to do more than the next guy, then we're just going to use more resources even as we get more efficient.
Yeah, so it's that keeping up with the Joneses idea, and we might not do it as overtly because that's become kind of passé or cliche, but we do it kind of implicitly, that if we save energy and, say, money in one area of life, we'll put it towards some other area of life and end up using as much or more energy than we did before.
Right. So if that's the case, then is this where that shift in culture comes that you're talking about, or shift in that cultural change in our goals, maybe?
I think so, and it's certainly not any kind of simple thing, and it's not anything that any one person, let alone one group, can prescribe. It has to be something that kind of gradually evolves in our society. And so it has to include things like realizing that we're part of the system, realizing that we're stretched time-wise, realizing that we're reaching limits in terms of not only carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but topsoil and easy, cheap energy, those kinds of things. When we realize these things and realize that there's alternatives, then gradually a new cultural narrative can evolve, whereas before the clamp was pretty much put on it.
Interesting. I think in our conversations, there was a mention of, I think, same-state economy. Well, I'm not sure if I'm coming up with the right term. But.
Yeah, steady state economics. And this would be one example. I don't think anyone is saying that this is the answer, but it's an example of the answer where there are alternatives to our growth for growth's sake economic system. And Steady State Economics, I believe, was a book by Herman Daly, who's actually a professor at the University of Maryland, but he used to be with the World Bank. And he came to realizations that growth for growth's sake couldn't continue. And in fact, one of those key phrases for going in right directions, I think, is one that he uses. It's development versus growth. And certainly we want to have growth at certain times, and growth is natural and good in many instances. But you or I wouldn't want to keep growing throughout our lives. We reach some human limit of our bodies at some state. And then we want to grow, and we want to develop, and maybe that's growth of ideas, but not growth in actual mass and throughput of food, et cetera. So the alternate to growth for growth's sake economics could be steady state economics.
Okay. And that would be a pretty big shift in the way we think about our economic system.
Absolutely, because it's not something we hear much in the media and discussion these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it is interesting to hear that someone who was at the World Bank came up with it. So it's not completely out of the mainstream. Maybe it's within reach.
Yeah, and there's lots of folks who have definitely considered this and talked about it. And in fact, here in Arlington, I think it's still based here in Arlington, is the Center for the Advancement of the Steady State Economy. It's something like that. You can look it up online. And their whole point is that we need to start considering options to growth for growth's sake. And they have a statement that you as an individual or as an organization or business can sign on to. And it's a statement pretty much just simply acknowledging that growth of material and energy consumption can't go on at a growth rate forever. And then they certainly look at all sorts of alternatives, including the steady state economy. But it's first just acknowledging that we have a problem here.
Sure, absolutely. And bringing in our consciousness, the fact that we have this problem, does that relate to Terra Sapiens, which I've also heard you talking about? It was authored by...
Yeah, this is a real interesting coincidence for me. I started using a phrase, geosapiens, to capture an idea of linking ourselves to the planet more, both bodily and mentally. And so we could think of ourselves as the creative consciousness of Earth, literally in a way, because if we came out of this Earth, we're now creatively conscious beings, and so is the Earth. Mm-hmm. And as I was developing these ideas and doing a few talks on them, I came across a online lecture that was given, I believe, here in Washington, D.C. It was David Grinspoon, who's the astrobiologist for the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. He's also with the Library of Congress, or has been named a position there in terms of his role with astrobiology. And he gave a talk called Terra Sapiens, which basically is the same as Geosapiens, because Geo is the Greek goddess of Earth, and Terra was the Roman goddess of Earth. We use those terms without knowing that. And his subtitle was also about going in sustainable directions. Wow. So either Geosapiens or Terra Sapiens is another way to kind of get our minds in a different place and start seeing alternatives.
Right, really seeing ourselves as part of that process.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that would also involve using our efficiency as the goal of our efficiency is really important. And if part of our goal is to live with the earth and not just to produce more, how does that play in if our goal changes from just being productive?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it goes back to that, what are we serving with efficiency? And if you think of it, past cultures and other cultures on Earth that are still not fully captured by this growth paradigm have certainly had their efficiencies. You know, economy of movement and understanding of how things are done best. I mean, those, you couldn't have a successful culture without it. But they've either been just de facto in a state where they haven't had to grow, in other words, where they don't equate their own success with having to grow, or many cultures would have had cultural stories and taboos even against growing at the expense of what kept them alive, their environment, their fellow human beings, etc. So efficiency is absolutely needed, but by itself won't solve the problem.
So what will replace the goal of production, of producing more?
The goal of producing more. Well, as we've kind of examined a little bit, steady state, something, just like we are a system at steady state. We take in food to replace and heal and exist, but we don't take in food to grow past a certain point, and we don't take in more and more and more food throughout our lives. So we have to have a sense that...
Hopefully not.
yeah, and if we do, we have problems, right?
That's right.
So we have to have a sense that the same applies at all different levels of living systems, and that we can grow to a certain extent, but then have to slow down at least, if not completely stop. The alternative to that, what is unrestricted growth on and on and on, that's simply called cancer, and we don't want to act in that kind of model.
Certainly not.
Yeah.
Where does play fit into all this? Because if we're not producing as much, do we have more time to play, or to just be on Earth? And how do we be on Earth when we're playing in a way that's sustainable? You know?
That's a great question, and I think, you know, I don't know that I would have brought this up separately, but it may be at the crux of everything. How do we enjoy our lives is another way of putting it. And we enjoy our lives when we play, when we're kind of being creative and having fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a book in 1962 or 3 that was written by Walter Kerr. And he was a film critic for the New York Times, of all things. But he wrote a book called The Decline of Pleasure. And it was a book that said that even at that time in American history, 50 years ago, that we were suffering from a decline of pleasure at the level of both the individual and the group. And the reason he attributed it to was that our culture had kind of absorbed the mentality of the Industrial Revolution, where, say, for instance, in the design of the assembly line, everything had to have its purpose, and it had to be efficient, and it had to always be working towards the maximum output. And so he said that by the 1960s that our culture had become one where our daily lives were so consumed. So that it was no longer possible just to do things for no reason, just to hang out or to have fun or to be creative. It had to be towards the service of faster production. And that's amazing to think that it was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
He said that two things were lost. One at the level of the individual was contemplation, just the letting the mind play. And then the other one was free narrative and storytelling at the level of the group. And I think we're just starting to, in society, realize that that's suffering a bit, and we need to reclaim that.
Right.
Yeah.
Reclaim just hanging out, and reclaim we've produced enough and we can stop now and do something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Boy, that word enough also is so powerful, isn't it? How do we know when's enough? And I think it was in the Tao Te Ching where they say only he who knows what is enough will have enough. And it comes right to that, really.
Wow. Yeah, I can certainly relate to that in my own life. Life moves so fast sometimes. It feels like I don't have a second to stop and decide whether I've done enough.
Mm-hmm.
So
you feel driven.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned a long time, what was it, long time planning at some...
When we were talking, I think I mentioned that there's a very interesting organization called the Clock of the Long Now Foundation. They're in San Francisco. Started in part in part by rock star Brian Eno. Very interesting part of the story. And their introduction on their website, if you go there, starts off with something to the effect of our society is revving itself up into a pathologically frenetic pace, something to that effect. And they're recognizing this issue too, therefore.
Yeah. So, Martin, what can we do in Arlington specifically if we want to act on some of these principles that we've been talking about?
Yeah, we've been talking at a pretty lofty level here, right? But all of it has to do with how we live our daily lives. And if we start internalizing some of these things about what part of the system we are and that we maybe need to slow down and look at growth in a different way, then we need to do things in our communities day by day. And there's a lot of things we could go into, but I'd like to suggest that people become familiar with what the Arlington Community Energy Plan is. It was something that was just being deliberated on when I was here. I was part of the process, actually. It was passed by the board, I think, about a year ago, and I believe it's in the implementation process. So what opportunities lie there, and what opportunities still need to be built into it, and how can we make it better? How can we as citizens get involved? I think that's a big one.
Wonderful. And that's real appropriate because we are Arlington Independent Media, so
that's right.
We would like to serve the Arlington community and help you all get involved. This has been a wonderful conversation, and it's actually encouraging me to slow down a little bit and find moments to live in the long now.
Yeah.
And I hope that for viewers out there, I hope that it's encouraged you to think about how to become geosapiens, because that's really what we need. Geosapiens, thinking about the planet as a whole, people who know when they've produced enough, so that we can actually use our efficiency to save the planet and also save our own time and preserve our own enjoyment of our own life in this world. I want to thank you, Martin, for being here, and I want to thank you for watching. And it's time now to sign off, and good luck in your endeavors.